Connor is going to be hosting a conversation this morning from over in the Center for Wellbeing and Care. And that conversation that he's going to be hosting is with Tyler VanderWeele, who's a professor at Harvard University who specializes in the study of well-being and its determinants. Now, his research focuses on spirituality and social relationships and understanding of what it means that these things like church that we participate in contribute to our flourishing, or what it means that we can be people who thrive in the midst of the world in which we live. I don't know if you know this or not, but he's going to tell you in just a few minutes. Coming to church actually has the capacity to add years to your life. Did you know that? As Connor joked about just a few minutes ago, you don't have to worry about eating a salad for lunch because you came to church today, okay? Now, it's only one of the so-called social determinants of health, but indeed, the deep practice of faith and life in spiritual community with one another is one of those things that not only helps to our thriving, our sense of what it means to enjoy life, but it has long-term consequences on our lives themselves. So I believe, seeing the screen blinking, it may mean that we are about to switch over to a new screen up here in front of me in just a second, and I'm going to turn it over to Tyler and to Connor, and they'll do a couple of intros, and they're going to jump right in. I hope that if you haven't had the opportunity to check out the Center for Wellbeing and Care yet, so much of what we are doing over there is shaped by this kind of science and research, which is not new. Religion as a social determinant of health is proven and has been research that's been done for a long, long time. And so, Tyler, welcome, and Connor, you're there as well, and I'm going to turn it over to them and let them have this amazing conversation.
Hey, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Christ Episcopal Church for this Faith Forum. I'm going to say welcome to everyone watching in All Saints Hall, everyone watching online, either live or maybe later in the week. We're so grateful that you're joining us today. We're in for a real treat today with this conversation. I want to introduce our guest. Tyler VanderWeele, PhD, is the John L. Loeb and Francis Lehman Loeb Professor of Epidemiology in the Departments of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and Director of the Human Flourishing Project, and co-director of the Initiatives on Health, Religion, and Spirituality at Harvard University. He holds degrees from the University of Oxford, University of Pennsylvania, and Harvard University in mathematics, philosophy, theology, finance, and biostatistics. His methodological research is focused on theory and methods for distinguishing between association and causation in the medical and social sciences, and more recently, on psychosocial measurement theory. His empirical research spans psychiatric and social epidemiology, the science of happiness and flourishing, and the study of religion and health. He's the recipient of the 2017 President's Award from the Committee of Presidents of Statistical Societies. He's published over 400 papers in peer-reviewed journals and is the author of the books Explanation and Causal Inference, Modern Epidemiology, Measuring Well-Being, and his most recent book, A Theology of Health, Wholeness, and Human Flourishing. He also writes a monthly blog posting on topics related to human flourishing for Psychology Today. So with that, I want to say welcome, Dr. VanderWeele.
Thank you. It really is a pleasure being here with you today, Father Gwen, and to be with you all to have this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you because your research kind of centers on this idea of human flourishing and is also connected to spirituality and religion as it shows up in overall well-being and health. And so this is kind of a perfect topic for us here at Christ Church with the Center for Wellbeing and Care that just opened last fall. We're going to kind of talk about that throughout, but I'm really excited. I did want to start with, I love the variety of topics that you have studied and the variety of topics that you have degrees in. So I wonder if you can tell us here at the beginning, what led you to the work that you're doing now, kind of maybe culminating with this theology of well-being and this study of spirituality. How did you get to this topic?
So it certainly was a long journey for me and not something I could have necessarily foreseen in advance. My doctoral dissertation was in biostatistics. It was fairly technical on new methods for assessing association and causation. But over time, I began reflecting on questions as to how my own faith was related to my work in public health. And as I began looking in the academic literature on this topic, much to my surprise, there were hundreds, even thousands of studies relating religious participation to health and well-being, which I'd never come across during my graduate studies. And it seemed that while the associations had been established, the open questions were, is this causal? And if so, what are the mechanisms? And those were precisely the sorts of methodologic questions that I had been approaching in my own technical work. So I applied for a small grant from the John Templeton Foundation to start a seminar series in religion and public health at the School of Public Health at Harvard, thinking I'd bring in speakers to sort of expose the rest of the school to these ideas. The grant was announced at one of our faculty meetings in the epidemiology department, and you could sort of see the eyebrows raised and the eyes roll. What is this doing here? In a department of epidemiology, but a faculty member came up afterwards and said, you know, Tyler, somewhere buried in the nurses' health study, this large cohort study of 100,000 nurses that had been run for over 40 years, there's a question on religious service attendance. No one's ever used it. You should take a look. And so sure enough, it was there and it was measured every 4 years. I sort of had the perfect data waiting for me. And so over time, began working with a postdoctoral fellow, analyzing this data. This was very much still a side project for me at this point in time. But there were substantial effects on health. Weekly religious service participation was associated with 30% decline in all-cause mortality, 30% declines in depression, 5-fold reductions in suicide. But these are big effects on important outcomes. Why aren't we talking about these matters more? And then I started thinking, what else is shaping population health that we're ignoring, which led to work on parenting, on forgiveness. And then I started thinking, what outcomes are we ignoring? We study health very well, we study income very well, and these are important things, but people care about more than that. They want to be happy, to have a sense of meaning in life, to try to be a good person. They care about their relationships. Why aren't we studying these other things with the same level of empirical rigor that we study income and health? And so those considerations really were what led to the formation of the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard in 2016. And that work has increasingly occupied more and more of my time. And over that time also started thinking more theologically about these questions as well, which again, over many years led to the work on the book of the Theology of Health. So it has been a long journey, again, not one I would have anticipated when I was awarded my PhD in biostatistics, but it's been enriching and wonderful to be able to engage in these topics.
Yeah. Well, I love that seemingly every step on the path kind of led you to, with the tools you needed to get to this place. And it seems so obvious when you bring up the fact that we don't really connect religious participation, spirituality, and those we don't really connect those with overall health. I mean, just saying it seems so obvious now, but I think you're spot on, that we've kind of isolated religious participation as this kind of nice thing over here that's really disconnected from outcomes. But it's amazing. And the statistics you just gave, those increases in overall health connected to participation it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, in some ways it is quite remarkable because, I mean, I think for the most part, religious practice and the Christian faith are really, oriented towards the divine, our relation with God, certainly with others as well, but to have such profound effects on health, on well-being, on a sense of meaning in life, on happiness, on longevity. The studies suggest weekly participation is associated with about 7 years of additional life. In some ways, these are kind of incidental effects, in spite of sort of aiming in some sense at the divine and the transcendent. That that participation, that being with others, that attempting to love God and love others, that service of others, that support from the community and offering others support affects health and well-being in so many other ways as well.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to that, particularly as we get towards the end. We're going to talk about kind of practical implications of your research and what all this means. But I did just want to flag for the people that are sitting in All Saints Hall right now. Did you hear him say weekly participation is associated with 7 extra years of longevity? So I imagine a cheer is going up in All Saints Hall. I would hope. Just by coming to church regularly and participating in a religious community, you're actually adding to your longevity and your overall health. I think that's incredible. So we'll come back there, but I think let's zoom out a little bit and look at what we mean when we talk about health and well-being in general. In your newest book, The Theology of Health, you spend some time at the beginning distinguishing between health of the body and health of the person. And I think that shows up too in your work on flourishing. I think for a long time, and even up until very recently, until I read a lot of your work, health immediately makes me think of physical health, and kind of how is my body doing? And I know anyone who's ever been to a doctor or had, major surgery or anything, that's really the only concern is your physical health. What are your vital signs and how do we improve those? But I think you are calling us to think about health in a slightly bigger way. So I wonder if we can start there. How do you distinguish well-being and health from maybe the biomedical model as it stands?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of debate in both the biomedical literature, but also the philosophical literature on what is it that we mean by health. One prominent definition of health that has been put forward by the World Health Organization back in 1946, still in place today, is that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This definition is often criticized within the biomedical world for being too broad. Certainly, the medical system can't deal with such a holistic notion of health. And so there's dispute. Is health really just about physical health and health of the body, or is it something broader than that? And I think a lot of these disputes can in fact be dissolved by recognizing that even in our ordinary language, we in fact have two different conceptions of health. The health of the body and the health of the person. And that World Health Organization, WHO definition of health is really more the health of the person. And I think once we recognize this, we can sort of clarify in any given context, are we talking about bodily health? Or are we talking about holistic health, the health of the person? And we can often have both concepts, even in the same sentence. You might say, well, he's physically healthy, but he's not a healthy person. He spends all of his time in his room socially isolated. There we have both concepts in the same sentence. And health really etymologically relates to a notion of wholeness. And so are we talking about the wholeness of the body, its parts and systems functioning as they ought to allow the normal range of human activity? Or are we talking about the health of the person, or what we might call flourishing as well, all aspects of a person's life really being good? And while I do think that World Health Organization, that WHO definition of health is quite broad and holistic, I think from a Christian perspective, it's in fact not broad enough. I think spiritual well-being also should be included. And there's in fact been kind of a long history of attempts to get spiritual well-being into the World Health Organization's definition of health. I think, for good reason, they haven't changed insofar as once they made a shift, it would open the door to all sorts of other proposals for alteration. But what we've started doing in our own work is referring to the notion of complete physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being as the WHO plus definition of health, really fully inclusive of all aspects of a person's well-being, including their spiritual well-being. But I think that latter concept, physical, mental, social, spiritual health as what we might think of as the health of the person or flourishing.
Well, I'd love to hear the definition. We talked last week a bit about the Center for Wellbeing and Care and how we have developed a model which is directly in line with everything you've just said, that well-being is this kind of kaleidoscope of factors that all shift and change. It's like a mobile that kind of moves and shifts, where one area might be the focus at any given moment, but you really need all of it. So we have physical well-being, we have mental, emotional well-being, vocational well-being, financial well-being, relational well-being. So it sounds like we're right in line here. But I think what we are trying to do is ground everything in that idea of spiritual well-being. Because I think you just named it. We all know people who are physically healthy, but are not flourishing. The joke I love to say is we probably all know people who are in really great shape and they work out all the time, and it seems like they're still lacking something in their life. They're still not flourishing. Or the person who has the greatest job they could possibly imagine, they make more money than they know what to do with. So their vocational well-being is off the charts, but they're still not flourishing. So I wonder if we can unpack a little more that idea of flourishing. What exactly is flourishing? How do you define it for the Human Flourishing Program?
Yeah, so our working definition of flourishing at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard is sort of living in a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good, including the contexts and communities in which that person lives. So it's all encompassing. All aspects of a person's life are good. So understood in that way, flourishing is an ideal. It's not something we ever perfectly attain in this life. We can always be flourishing and seek flourishing more. It's also multidimensional. It concerns all aspects of a person's life. So people might be flourishing in different ways and less so in others. Someone might be really struggling with health, but have really good relationships. Another person may have a sense of calling and vocation to serve others in a difficult, challenging context, which may adversely affect their day-to-day happiness and life satisfaction, but they have a deep sense of meaning from carrying out this work. So again, people can be flourishing in some ways and not others, and there's always room for improvement. We also typically distinguish when we're trying to be precise between flourishing and well-being. Often, we'll use these words interchangeably, and I think they are closely connected. But flourishing has, I think, slightly different connotations. We think of thriving, well-being, flourishing. Thriving is almost doing well in spite of the circumstances, whereas flourishing is more of a consonance with the community, with the environment in which one lives. So when we're trying to be precise, we'll say something like well-being is a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good as they pertain to that individual. Whereas flourishing is being in a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good, including the context, communities, environments in which that person lives. So one might attain a degree of well-being in a corrupt community or environment, but one is not fully flourishing because one's community is not good. In some sense, one's community's well-being is a part of one's own flourishing because one participates in the common good and because that community supports one's own well-being. And so, again, we take flourishing in this very, very expansive manner. When we do try to operationalize this in practice, in our empirical research, say, we actually use domains very similar to what you have at the Center for Wellbeing Care. We look at happiness and life satisfaction. We look at physical and mental health. We look at meaning and purpose. We look at matters of character and virtue. We look at close social relationships, and we look at financial and material stability as well. These important means to kind of sustain the other ends of flourishing. And then we will also look at dynamics concerning community and spiritual well-being also. And so we again approach this topic of flourishing in this very faceted way. But ultimately, I think what we're aiming at, what we're hoping for, what we only imperfectly achieve in this life is that state where all aspects of life are good for ourselves, but also for the communities around us.
Well, it's such a good note here, and we'll probably say it a few more times in this conversation. As opposed to kind of well-being as the world would have it, I'm thinking of like the cover of Men's Health magazine. That vision of well-being is uh, kind of you've achieved perfection. You've worked hard and you've achieved whatever perfection is here. I think you bring out in your work that the Christian idea of well-being and the kind of ultimate Christian flourishing is not actually possible here. That's a promise made to us that we kind of follow by faith, that one day we will be in union with God and we will be whole, maybe with a capital W. And so I think that's just good to note here that what you're not saying is here are the 7 steps to flourishing as like a life hack or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the Christian perspective, what we are ultimately called to, what we are should be oriented towards is spiritual well-being and eternal flourishing. And in some ways, that spiritual well-being here and now is constituted by our orientation towards and by seeking that eternal flourishing, that complete communion with or vision of God that we don't have in this life, maybe can experience partially, but which we hope for, which we seek, which through love and charity we hope to help bring about for ourselves and for others. And I think that orientation also helps make sense of and in some sense relativize the notions of temporal flourishing, just as someone might give up some matter of happiness or life satisfaction or health for a good cause or to serve the poor or to provide health care in a disadvantaged area. There can be real sacrifices to serve others. I think from a Christian perspective, that is a correct orientation. I think we are sometimes called to lay down our lives, to lay down, to sacrifice some aspects of our temporal flourishing for the sake of others and for that orientation, that ultimate orientation towards God in Jesus Christ. So, I mean, I do think a Christian understanding of flourishing includes what we might have within a more secular context across these dimensions. And I think these things like happiness and physical health and meaning and our relationships are important. These are genuine goods, but they are not our ultimate ends. And sometimes we are asked, I think, by God and by others, by the church community, to make sacrifices for the sake of others and in our pursuit of that spiritual well-being, that eternal flourishing in God.
Yeah. And that's how we have kind of positioned all these areas of well-being here at the center, that it is all grounded in spiritual well-being, because we, again, we could kind of go around and just share people who have not had the best physical health, meaning they've had some chronic disease or some disability that has made life hard in a physical way, who still seem to be well in a lot of different ways, whose faith kind of connects them to that ultimate good that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there are complex relations between often suffering and flourishing. Sometimes they're viewed as antonyms in some sense, but I think that's wrong. I think that's not the correct understanding. I do think suffering always involves loss or absence, privation of something good in one's life, but often that suffering can lead to further transformation, further flourishing. It can lead us to reflect upon what is most important in life. It can lead to a reorientation of our priorities. It can lead to a real growth in our character, in our fortitude, in our hope. The words of St. Paul, we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, hope. Hope does not disappoint us because God has poured out his love into our hearts with the Holy Spirit who he has given us. So that suffering, well, I mean, I think we are called to help alleviate that suffering, to try to address the absence of good in our life and the lives of others. That suffering can also be a source of growth. It isn't always, it isn't for all people, but I think it's always an invitation to seek that growth, to seek a deepening of relationships, a finding of new meanings, a spiritual growth and a growth in character. So I think that relation between suffering and flourishing is a complex one, but I think it's one that the Christian faith has an important account of, and in some ways an account that many others really can't deal with in this life. So I think it's something that we can genuinely contribute to others within our community, and to invite others also into that understanding.
Yeah. Well, I think that's perfect as we're heading towards Lent. I mean, Ash Wednesday is next week, and so we begin this 40-day journey towards Holy Week and the cross. And I find this temptation, I find it in myself, but also in the broader society, kind of skip over the suffering and jump right to the redemption and the joy of Easter. And I think the Christian tradition has held for 2,000 years that actually the only way to resurrection is through death. And the only way to the hope of Easter is through that suffering. And I think you're right to name, that's not saying, everyone needs to go choose suffering. We're going to bring suffering upon themselves, but instead to see it as a vehicle for potentially transformation.
Yeah, and I mean, as we touched on earlier, I mean, I do think while often suffering is not chosen and we find ourselves in difficult circumstances and have to work through those and rely on the support of community. In other cases, I mean, we do choose to voluntarily make sacrifices for the sake of others, in some sense, embrace suffering voluntarily for some good cause, for some good end. And I think we see that in Jesus's life. We see it in a very profound way in his service of others, but also in his death on the cross for us. I had about a couple of years ago a colleague, Jewish psychologist, who asked me, Tyler, was Jesus flourishing on the cross? And I was a bit taken aback. I immediately responded yes, but then I thought, what does that mean? And I think if we once again from that lens, Jesus's contribution on the cross to the world, to the salvation of the world was extraordinary. He was, while certainly suffering, also flourishing in a very profound sense. So I do think we can have that flourishing even in the midst of suffering, and sometimes through that suffering itself. And I think Lent, Holy Week, Good Friday, remind us of that, and our celebration of that fact as we also look forward to and anticipate Easter and that hope of the life to come.
Well, I think, and I love that. I mean, what a powerful question, was Jesus flourishing on the cross? But I think what comes to mind is the night before in the Garden of Gethsemane, and that moment where Jesus kind of chooses the easy road of, Lord, take this cup from me. I'd rather not suffer in this way, but not my will, thy will be done. And I think that to kind of wrap up this part of our conversation on suffering, that feels like the difference between suffering that can be redemptive is when it is offered up in the service of something greater versus kind of meaningless pain or meaningless suffering. I feel like that's where despair is ripe to kind of take over.
And I think that's right. And I think that's also why we need community, because when we're in the midst of severe suffering, whether that's physical or emotional or existential, it can be difficult to find that meaning, and we need those around us to remind us of the broader context, to remind us for the possibility of spiritual growth and amidst that suffering, and then also to provide support. Yes, we seek transformation through suffering, but we also need each other to to make it through those times of difficulty. And I do think that is one of the beautiful things about Christian community operating well, is that support is there, but so is that more ultimate orientation towards our final end in God, and again towards those words of St. Paul of suffering producing perseverance, character, hope, and of our remaining fixed in that.
And the faith that, like you said, there is something beyond. There's something ultimate that kind of transcends the suffering of this present moment. Yeah. Well, you named there the importance of community. So I wonder if we can shift a little bit to the social and even the moral dimensions of health, because I was really fascinated to see virtue as one of those categories of flourishing. I think to get us there, I'm reminded of something I heard Dr. Abraham Verghese say. He's a doctor, a professor at Stanford, and a novelist who writes these incredible, huge novels. I don't know where he finds the time to do all of those things. But I heard him speak recently here in Charlotte, and he talked about the difference between cure and healing, the difference in being cured of something and being healed of something. And that the medical, kind of biomedical model focuses pretty laser focused on curing. And I think what this whole conversation has been circling around is this idea of healing, even when the cure is not there or the disease itself doesn't go away. And so I say that to think about the role of community, that the Christian community cannot cure necessarily. I think God does answer prayers, and there can be healing in that way, but the community offers some kind of healing and transformation and well-being beyond necessarily the cure. And so I wonder if you can talk a bit about like what shows up in the research about social relationships and communities that seems to have such an impact on overall health.
So Nate, yeah, I do think that notion of healing is much broader than simply cure. And in the third part of my book on theology of health, kind of conceive of healing as a restoration and even fulfillment of wholeness, both of the body, but also all aspects of the person as well. And I think that broader notion of healing, the restoration of wholeness of the person, can help us make sense of those contexts where maybe there isn't physical healing in some cases, but there can still be growth. There can still be a deepening of relationships, or a finding of new meanings, or growth in character. But again, I certainly think from Christian perspective, community itself is one of those central pathways to healing. I commented earlier on the powerful effects of religious service attendance on health and well-being, but it really is kind of those communal aspects of it. You don't find such powerful associations with private practices. Those of course are important and meaningful in the Christian life, but in terms of physical health, it is shockingly those communal aspects of participation, showing up Sunday at church with others, that have such powerful effects on health. And one finds similar relationships with social connection, very negative effects of loneliness on subsequent health, very positive effects of a sense of social connection and social support. And so those relationships that we form, certainly are of importance and of value in and of themselves. And I think the Christian vision is a union ultimately of Christ and the church, the community of the church with Christ. But those relationships and that community are also a source of healing. Healing of the body, it seems, but also healing of the person.
Yeah. And I wonder, I don't want us to focus just on us kind of here in the community of Christ Church. So one question about that social and almost moral dimension of health. Here we talk about well-being for all. So we need to actually be concerned with the well-being of our broader community, the Charlotte community, and neighborhoods that may be different in any number of ways from ours. And so I wonder, Can you say just a bit about economic and social, maybe inequality or the impacts that that has on overall flourishing?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly those economic circumstances are important means to sustain flourishing. There's no doubt from research that growing up or living in impoverished communities, not having good access to healthy foods or health care affects the health of the body, but also the health of the person. It has effects on mental health. It has effects on relationships, and these are critical means. And you know, in many of our studies, when we can collect data empirically, we find that across those dimensions of happiness, health, meaning, character, relationships, and financial security, it's often that financial security that is lowest. Not in all populations. One doesn't find this in Denmark and in Germany, for example, but in the United States, it is the case. It's sort of on empirical grounds. It's what people are struggling with the most. And so I think we are called as Christians to care for both the material and the spiritual needs of others. So I think finding ways to provide those material needs to address inequalities, both at the individual level, but also at the structural level. Are we pursuing a society in which all people have the resources they need, in which all people can flourish? And if we take that definition of flourishing seriously, that it's sort of all aspects of a person's life, including the context, communities, environments in which that person lives, then the well-being of others, including their material needs, are part of our own flourishing. And we are not fully flourishing if those around us are really struggling, are really suffering. And so I do think we need to take these matters seriously. Having said that, I think there are also things that we can sometimes learn from more disadvantaged communities as well. The data we've collected, while we certainly find the normal black-white disparities in health and income, and while those are serious and need to be addressed, we often find that in Black communities there's a greater sense of social connectedness, a greater sense of meaning and purpose as well. And when we look globally, we surprisingly find somewhat similar patterns where richer developed countries often have higher levels of life satisfaction and of health and of material stability, but lower levels of meaning and purpose than poorer developing countries, lower levels of quality social relationships, lower levels of a pro-social orientation to others. So I think this raises important questions also at a societal level. How do we carry out economic development in ways that don't compromise meaning and purpose or our relationships? And so I think we have something to learn from often the communities in which we're seeking to serve. And so I think that learning, that exchange can go both ways. But I think as Christians, we are called to serve others. We are called to care for the material needs of others. And I think we should take these inequalities and the adversity, the struggles that others have, the material struggles, very seriously.
Yeah. Well, it seems like, I mean, this is just more kind of on the theme of this whole conversation that in the same way that health cannot be reduced to just kind of numbers in your chart, that there's something more going on there. It's the same with when it comes to justice and kind of well-being across the spectrum, that it's not just kind of writing a check to a charity and here's a financial transaction. It's not just the disparities in that sense, that there's more going on here. I wonder, so this is a good kind of transition to today's readings in the lectionary. And today's opening collect in particular was very hard hitting. The opening collect said, it brought out Paul's words that if we do anything without love, it's nothing. It amounts to nothing. And there's actually this line in the collect that those who basically live without love are accounted dead before God. That without that love, there's no life in us. And then the readings we got were from Luke's gospel, and it was Jesus telling us to love our enemies, and really kind of drilling down pretty deep on this idea that you can't just love those who are kind to you and those who love you. You have to love everyone. So at this moment in our country and in our world, although I don't know that it's more divided than it's ever been, I think we've had some pretty divisive times. It feels very countercultural to say something like, love your enemies and forgive those who hurt you. I wonder if, in this context of thinking about flourishing and well-being, you can talk a bit about the power of forgiveness, maybe how that shows up in someone's well-being.
Sure. Yeah. I do think the question of love of one's neighbor, and including one's enemy, is a critical one for society today. And I do think it is a message that the Christian community can try to bring to the world, that on account of the value, the dignity, the worth, and from a Christian perspective, being created in the image of God of each person, that we should love and care for each person. Each person is worthy of that love. And if we take that seriously, that includes our enemies as well. That includes those who may have ill will towards us, or those towards whom we might be inclined to have ill will. If we take seriously their worth, their dignity, their being created in the image of God, we should be seeking their good as well. And I do think, while counterintuitive, it is a powerful message, and I think it's one that our society needs. I think it's one that our society needs to overcome the divisions that we see. I think it leads us to try to understand better those who may have disagreements, perhaps strong and profound disagreements, but to seek a way forward, to seek to address the concerns of others as well. I think we need more love of neighbor, more love of enemy in our political life, certainly. And I think the effects on flourishing can be profound. And beautiful sermon by Martin Luther King Jr. He talks about what the effects of that love of enemy can be. Its potential to end those cycles of hatred and violence. The freeing of the individual from that hatred, and the capacity to transform the enemy as well. That won't always happen, but it can, and sometimes does. And so I do think that that love of enemy can have really profound consequences. There are still then questions of kind of, what do we do with wrongs? What do we do when our enemy, in some sense, has wronged us, or even close people around us who we might not consider enemies? What do we do when they've wronged us? How do we manage that hurt? And again, in that sermon by Martin Luther King Jr., he speaks of the capacity of that love of enemy to free us from hatred. And in some sense, that's what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is, I think, really simply a replacing of ill will towards the offender with goodwill. It is, in some sense, a restoration of love following an offense that might be towards our enemies, but it might be towards someone close to us who we're really struggling with anger. I think forgiveness understood in that way, simply replacing ill will with goodwill, is different than forgoing justice. One can pursue a just outcome and still forgive and still want what's ultimately good for the offender. It can sometimes be different than reconciliation as well. In cases of, say, repeated domestic abuse, it might be that under certain circumstances, the right thing is separation. The good thing, the loving thing, might be that in some circumstances, but one can still hope for the good of the other. I do think from a Christian perspective that forgiveness, that replacing ill will with goodwill towards others does ultimately aim at a final reconciliation, even if that is only in the life to come. But I think forgiveness itself is simply that replacing of ill will with goodwill. And that can be tremendously freeing. It can be a letting go of anger, a letting go of hatred. In some contexts, it can be an opening of that pathway when appropriate towards reconciliation. But the empirical and the psychological research on this topic really suggests it can have profound effects of getting us out of cycles of rumination, of returning to the offense again and again, or of suppression of trying to bury it. And so I think there are models that have been developed that we've in fact evaluated in randomized trials for how to forgive when we're struggling to do so. A model that we've used and have evaluated is Everett Worthington's REACH model, where each component of REACH, R-E-A-C-H, stands for kind of a different component of the process. R, recall the hurt. Don't suppress it, but allow those feelings to surface. E, empathize with the offender. Try to understand the offender's reasons without validating or condoning the actions, but try to understand the other. A, altruistic gift. Realize that forgiveness is an altruistic gift that can be offered, and realize that we ourselves have sometimes done wrong and have received forgiveness. C, commit. Make that decision to forgive. Realizing that if forgiveness really is a replacement of ill will with goodwill, this is something we can decide to do. But H, hold on to the forgiveness, realizing that our emotions don't always correspond perfectly with our decisions, with our will, and so that we can hold on to that commitment to forgive, even if it takes time for our emotions to adjust. We've in fact embedded and sort of reduced this REACH forgiveness model into a 2 to 3 hour self-directed forgiveness workbook to help those forgive who want to forgive and are struggling to do so. We've evaluated this workbook in a large randomized trial of about 4,500 participants in 5 relatively high conflict countries: Colombia, South Africa, Ukraine, Indonesia, and Hong Kong, and have found effects of this forgiveness workbook, not only on promoting forgiveness, but also relieving depression, relieving anxiety, increasing hope, increasing flourishing. So I do think that that forgiveness of others can be a powerful way to restore relationships, to free us, to seek further flourishing, and also to help us when needed with love of those who have offended us, with even love of enemy. So happy to send the link to those book resources around, or you can type in REACH Forgiveness Workbook and it will come up, or you can find it on our Human Flourishing Program website as well. But I think these are powerful resources, and we're currently launching forgiveness campaign efforts in churches and schools to promote this work of forgiveness. But I think that forgiveness, again, empowers love of enemy, empowers love of neighbor.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible. I mean, that to so systematically kind of understand the impact that forgiveness has, not only on the person who's forgiven. I mean, sure, when you forgive someone of something they've done, you're in a sense setting them free from that. But I love how you've tied it to our own flourishing, that we really cannot flourish while holding on to that kind of hot coal of resentment, ourselves. We'll be sure to kind of include the link to that. We're nearing the end of our time, and so I promised at the beginning we'd kind of talk a bit more about practical stuff. And so you've given us the workbook, and I'll just say to the folks gathered and the folks watching, if you're looking for a Lenten practice, because Lent starts next week, the forgiveness workbook might just be a good tool as we head towards Easter in a little over 40 days. I wonder if in our last few minutes we can talk a bit about some tangible ways that individuals can improve or maybe cultivate flourishing in their own lives.
Yeah, so I mean, there are kind of small, activities that can be helpful. Then there's broader, I think, institutional, community pathways, and then I think there are critical spiritual pathways as well. So maybe we can increasingly move out. But I do think the little activities of of life can be helpful, and we have studied these, and others have studied these empirically. So simple practices like gratitude can be profoundly powerful. Simply writing down three things you're grateful for, and why. 3 times a week, and doing this for 6 weeks has been found to have effects on improving happiness, decreasing depressive symptoms, improving quality of sleep, lowering self-reported health symptoms. And this has been studied in dozens of randomized trials. This is really easy to do, and the effects on our own well-being are real. In my family, we do this around the dinner table, a couple of times a week, and again, I think it really changes the dynamics, and I think contributes to our own well-being. I feel I can notice the difference between the weeks we do and do not do this. Another one of these simple activities is acts of kindness. Sort of, maybe make a commitment for 6 weeks to choose one day each week where you carry out 5 acts of kindness that you wouldn't otherwise do. And it can take quite a bit of planning to get 5 in a single day, but the research suggests it's more powerful doing it 5 in one day than spreading them out the course of the week, perhaps because it requires that intentional effort. But again, studies have shown that doing this versus some neutral activity enhances one's happiness, one's sense of connection with others, one's sense of flow. And so again, this is something that's very easy to do, very easy to implement. I try to do this myself every Lent. In addition to kind of sacrifice and giving something up, I think it can be helpful to take on something positive as well. And this is one of course, many different activities. But again, the work in positive psychology has suggested that this can have important benefits on one's health and well-being also. Those forgiveness activities, likewise, can alleviate depression, anxiety, improve flourishing. And so I think is another important and critical resource. But I do think ultimately, if we're thinking about not just our happiness and mental health, but purpose, character, meaning in life, I think these things really do require communities, the communities of our families, of our neighborhoods, of our workplaces, of our churches. And the research suggests that while these little activities are helpful, that really for those deeper changes of meaning, of purpose, of character, we need community life. We need to fully participate in that. And so I think making a commitment to community, showing up, being with others, serving others, even when it's difficult sometimes, and it's perhaps those very difficulties, working through those relationship challenges that allows us to deepen relationships, to find meaning, to grow in character. And so I do think the church itself provides an incredible community in which that can take place and which can be of service to others, others within the church, but others outside of the church as well. And of course, those church communities also orient us towards those more important elements of spiritual well-being, of our ultimate and final end in God, of our service and sacrifice for others in our journey towards God and our journey towards love of neighbor and love of God. So I guess I'm sort of preaching to the choir here, but that commitment to participating weekly or more in that church community and in communities of other types, I think is really important and profound. And I think in the wake of COVID, it's important to reinvest in community. Many communities have disappeared or are struggling. So yes, invest in the Christ Church community, but invest in other communities as well. This is an important part of our life together and is a critical pathway to flourishing.
Well, that is a great place to end. We're here right at the end of time. I said that the last time I did a Faith Forum too. We're not at the end of time. We're at the end of our time here together. I do want to just kind of circle a few things that you said. So we mentioned at the beginning that everyone here in All Saints Hall or who's watching, who's at church today, you get 7 extra years of life. You heard it here first. We can give you a little certificate that you could take home with you. But I do want people to kind of turn that switch in your head, because I've found even in my own life at times, I think about my whole week and my whole life with these kind of distinct things that I'm doing. And there's all this stuff I'm doing for my well-being. So I'm going to the gym and I'm exercising and I'm eating right and I'm doing all this. And then church is kind of over here on the side as this other thing that I'm doing. And so I just encourage people after this conversation to start thinking about exactly what you just said, Dr. VanderWeele, the investment in this community as one of the means that you're improving your flourishing, that you're helping not only yourself, but the whole community, because we can flourish when you invest and you kind of jump in with both feet. So again, I say Lent is here. And so maybe this is part of your Lenten commitment as we head towards Easter. Okay, Dr. VanderWeele, thank you so much for taking your time. Thank you for all your research. It's been a joy to talk to you.
Glenn, it was really a pleasure being here today, and wonderful to be able to join you all virtually, at least. And I wish you a happy and blessed Sunday, and thank you for all the fine work that you do, both in the parish, to the community, and at the Center for Wellbeing and Care. So I wish you all the very best, and you will be in my prayers. But pleasure again at being able to have this opportunity today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you to all of you for being here this day, to be present for such a powerful and thought-provoking conversation with Connor and Dr. Sorry, I forgot the first part of his last name, VanderWeele. So many good ideas about how to flourish, and that means flourishing with not just the folks who are here, but out in the community, and ways to deepen our journey for that. So if you're short on ideas for Lent, come talk to us. We got ideas, but we're glad that you are here. So go in peace to flourish as you love and serve the Lord. Thank you.